Good afternoon, thank you. Looks like standing room only, so please take your seats. I want to say how honored I am to be part of this really very historic event, the first Reagan Institute Summit on Education. First is an operative word. It means there'll be a second, third, etc. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speakers, but in doing so, I'm reminded of a meeting I had with President Reagan when I was Secretary of Labor. We were discussing a fairly controversial issue, and I remember saying, "I'm sure going to get bruised over this." And he responded, "Ann, you only get bruised when you try to accomplish something." That said, our next presentation will be a conversation between two secretaries of education who have received their share of bruises. One past, the other present. In doing so, they both understand all too well that education should prepare students to inherit the blessings and liberties of a free society. They both know that education is the key to unlocking the doors of opportunity for one of our most precious commodities, every child. Today, we have the opportunity to learn from these two fine leaders about several things. Where we began after the 40th president's speech in 1983, when he characterized our system of education as putting our nation at risk, and where we are today, 35 years later. What's the same? What's better? What's worse? And moreover, what's the plan to move forward? Having served in the president's cabinet, I witnessed and experienced the challenges of such responsibilities at this level. Therefore, I am honored to introduce our first panelist, my former colleague and President Reagan's Secretary of Education from 1985 to 1988, Dr. William J. Bennett, currently chairman of Conservative Leaders for Education. Describing education as the architecture of the soul, he became known for his quick wit, his remarkable energy, his extraordinary tenacity, and an exceptionally inquisitive mind. President Reagan said, and I quote, "Bill Bennett has spent a lifetime taking serious ideas seriously." Seriously. As an aside, let me mention on a personal note that Bill Bennett as Secretary of Education, and then Bill Verity, Secretary of Commerce, and I as Secretary of Labor, met one day to plan what became a day-long discussion and a report, Building a Quality Workforce. It was held July 1988. In the pre-planning meeting, I looked at Bill Bennett. I said, "Okay, bud, if you educate everyone the way you should," I looked at Bill Verity and I said, "and you create jobs for them, I'm sitting pretty as Secretary of Labor." So that was our effort. So today, let us all agree and come to realize that the challenge must be met now, today. Facing that challenge has fallen on our current Secretary of Education, Ms. Betsy DeVos. Known as an advocate for school choice, Secretary DeVos is facing a number of pressing issues: school safety, the appropriate role of the federal government in education, state implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act, overcrowded, underfunded schools, teacher training and readiness, parental involvement, what constitutes a quality education, just to name a few. She leads the Department of Education during a time of accelerating change, both in the education sector and in the world at large. And so let's hear what these distinguished guests have to say, for after all, they understand all too well that education is our future. Once you've got it, it's never lost. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Secretary Betsy DeVos and Secretary William J. Bennett. Thank you and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know about you, this used to happen to me at universities. I'd be introduced by the president and then he'd leave. I don't know why, but anyway. If you see me limping, I'm limping. It's not because of old age, it's because of torn cartilage. Quick story. We had 3 black labs in a row. When we went to buy our 4th, people who sell us the dog said, get a golden one, a yellow one. You'll see him better at night and you won't trip over him. I tripped over him at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So some things, anyway, I'm limping a little bit, but still able to take a bruise and occasionally give a bruise. Betsy, how do you like the job?
I like the job a lot.
You do?
On most days.
Yeah.
I do. No, it's a privilege to serve, and anytime I have a moment of question, all I have to do is picture one of the students that I've had the opportunity to interact with that may be helped ultimately, and that sets it all straight.
Do you find, as I did, that actually what you just said, visiting the schools, talking to the students, no substitute for that?
No substitute for that.
Reading the reports is interesting, but seeing the kids and seeing the work is...
Right. Seeing the possibility.
What are the hardest parts?
I think the hardest challenge is trying to help people understand how much we need to change. And we know that the forces of the status quo don't want to do that. And yet, we're going to talk about some of the NAEP results this week. We know that the way we've done things simply isn't working for too many students, for too many kids, and we need to see things done differently. We need a lot more creativity.
Okay, let's talk about what those things might be in a minute, but let's first describe the NAEP scores, the nation's report card. What do we see?
Well, I'd like to first, also reference what we are convened around today, and that is the recognizing the 35th anniversary of a Nation at Risk report. And say we are still a nation at risk, and I would say at even greater risk today when we think of the many different technological changes and advancements in every other area of society. And today it is, I believe, both a national security risk and interest, and it's certainly our economic future that is at stake. And if you look at the past, since NAEP was started here, the screen up on the board shows you there's really been overall about a 2% change in 4th grade reading results in all of the years since NAEP was begun. And it just points to stagnation.
Yeah.
And if you look at then the commensurate spending, per pupil spending, it's gone up since the Nation at Risk was put forward 75% in 2016 dollars, 75%. And if you look at those together, you see quite a divergence. Scores continuing to muddle along, unremarkable as was stated many different places this week, and yet look at the spending. This is not something we're going to spend our way out of, and it's not something we're going to mandate or regulate our way out of.
There is some good news, though, right? If we disaggregate the data, if we break it down, there are some places that this last NAEP 2017 suggested knew what they were doing, or even more, knew a great deal about what they were doing and were improving.
Yeah, I would really want to highlight Florida, which began very comprehensive reform efforts in the late 90s, early 2000s. And in 1998, they ranked 47th to 49th in all the NAEP scores. And they, under the leadership of former Governor Bush, really were intentional about looking at student-centered reforms that would make a difference. So you look at the fact that they introduced transparency for parents to know how the schools are doing, an A through F grading system. They introduced a lot more flexibility at the local level, giving and empowering school leadership to try things and do things differently. They went after and really improved teacher certification efforts and gave different pathways to become certified as teachers. They implemented a 3rd grade reading requirement, knowing that if students aren't reading by the time they exit 3rd grade, it's a really rough road ahead. learning to read versus reading to learn. And they introduced the most rigorous or the most generous and broad merit pay system for teachers. And then they also introduced a number of choices, including a tax credit scholarship program, a couple of programs targeted at special needs students, and these reforms have borne out. They now are 5th and 8th in fourth grade NAEP scores, and it's really attributable, I think, to this concerted effort to tackle reforms on a student-focused, student-centered basis and do what's right for kids. So today in Florida, 46% of students choose schools other than their assigned school, and that doesn't even account for the percentage of families that move to a place and pay whatever the real estate market requires to live there. So the vast majority of students in Florida are in schools and in education environments of their parents' choosing. And I think this is a model for other states to look at and emulate, and I hope that other states are going to look at all of the ways Florida has gone after this and continued to go after this.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that continued because as we learned over and over again from education of children, young children, it's fine to do good preschool stuff, but you need consistency because those things can wash away. They can just disappear. But over time, the reinforcement of the same things can make a difference. And Jeb Bush, not so long ago, but some time ago, and yet Florida's been consistent in its emphasis, I think, from Governor Bush, Governor Scott, and they have stayed with it. The second thing, and please comment on that if you want, but the second thing I wanted to mention is if we draw down a little deeper, dive down a little deeper, individual cities and communities in Florida, about which the NAEP told us as well, have done particularly well, correct?
Yes, there were 3 TUDAs that participated in that voluntary study, and all of those urban areas showed improvements. I think importantly, too, the results for Florida's NAEPs demonstrated that not only students at the top end of the performance scale, but those at the bottom end of the performance scale improved. And we saw some improvements for those at the top end in other states, but Florida is really the only place where you saw improvement with those that really need the most help. And again, I would argue it's because they really have been very intentional about these student-centered reforms, and they've stuck with them, and they've continued to improve on them and iterate, and have acknowledged that this is not a destination, that they have to continue to make changes and try new things and do things differently for students to be able to succeed.
And Miami's one of those places, right? So that if the kids are doing well in Miami, then arguably, like the lyric goes to New York, you can make it anywhere. If the kids in Miami can be brought up to that level of achievement, one would think you could do it elsewhere as well. What do we do then? I remember one of the first you're so right about the continuum here. I was saying a lot of these things in the 80s, said them in the 90s, the same things remain true. One of the publications we put out back then was called What Works. So it would seem from what you're saying, Florida has some idea of what works, and it's doing it, hasn't forgotten it, it's continued to do the same thing. How do we get other states to do what works? Because if you look at those scores again, you look across the board, a lot of states flat, some down. Why won't, if you have a development in medicine, other doctors will do the same thing. They'll do it in other states. Is there a jealousy? Is there a pride of place? Why not say, let's go to Florida and figure out what they're doing?
Well, I hope that other governors and legislators will do that and will take notice of these results. But we know that the forces of the status quo are very strong, and change is hard. But what we are doing simply is not right for too many students, and it's not acceptable, and we shouldn't stand for it. We just came in 4th in the Winter Olympics, and I heard people outraged about this. Well, I don't hear the same kind of outrage about the fact that we're 40th in the world in math.
Yeah.
Why is that? We should be outraged. We should continue to say this is not acceptable. We need change, but it needs to happen primarily at the state and the local level. because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, but there are things to be learned, and I mean there is a state of the art. There are things that we know, and there are things that we know that work. I remember with the success of you remember the great Jaime Escalante, the Stand and Deliver, the math teacher, calculus teacher in California, and I remember when I went out and visited him, I saw his principal first, and I said, this must be the most popular guy in the school. They said, no, he's not. He's very popular with parents and kids, but not with some of the other teachers. And I said, why not? Well, because he gets these great achievement levels with his kids and they don't. He teaches calculus and they don't know how. Well, there's something wrong there, right? There's something definitely wrong.
Indeed.
I wanted to say something about just a bit of a plug because of the state-to-state comparison and learning state to state. This organization I'm with, Conservative Leaders for Education, we talk with a group of people. Frankly, I didn't spend nearly as much time as I should have when I was secretary. These state legislators who have a vision, who have ideas of things to do, and we get them together, and they're from many different states. We have about 20 members now to compare notes on what's successful. So to try to regularize this notion of finding out what works and seeing if it's replicable in another place.
And I salute you for doing that and encourage you to keep it up, because you're right, state legislative leadership can make a huge difference. And I urge and encourage them to not only take, I think a lot of them feel like, okay, if we do the third grade reading component, we can check the box and we're going to get change. It's got to be a whole lot more than that. It really does have to be a comprehensive approach to making the framework such that the results are going to be different from every local community and from every school building, but allowing the kind of creativity and innovation that needs to happen at that local level. Putting that framework together at the state level is really critical to that. And there are some states that are down the road toward that, but they haven't been, I don't think, any of them as comprehensive as Florida has been.
Yeah, I did notice, because I've spent some time there and spent some time with the governor, Arizona, Doug Ducey. They were flat this year, but I think they had made
the previous years they've
previous
shown
2 or 3
improvement.
And particularly, I know an area of special interest for you is in the whole charter area. Their charter schools are just scoring off the shooting the lights out. They're just doing very, very well. I know some people have criticized. It's interesting, have criticized Arizona for being the Wild West here in education, but they're trying different things, and I think most important, they're trying to measure what happens as a result of trying different things.
Right, absolutely. And you know, I have visited a number of traditional public schools that are taking different approaches. One of them in Casper, Wyoming, a very, unsuspecting place, where for 25 years, the elementary school I visited, has been totally teacher directed. And just within the last 2 or 3 years, they've switched to a competency mastery-based approach. So they have multi-age classrooms, and the lines are very blurred between grades. And within that district in Casper, parents have the choice of sending their child to any of the elementary schools. And so the parents and the students I met there are very thrilled with that approach, and the students are very happy. They're thriving at that school. So they've done something different outside of the norm. Another school I visited in Indiana, Cold Spring, it's an innovation school in the Indianapolis district, and the teachers and the leadership there have totally reorganized and done things the way they wanted to set them up, and the students, as a result, are doing. They've gone from an F to an A school in a matter of a year and a half or 2 years. And they were telling me that they realized they needed a Saturday program for some of the students. And within a month, they had it up and running. Well, if they were still asking permission of the next level of command, they would have been still waiting. So these things can be done. It just takes the will to do them.
And your visits are no small thing either, I know. And believe me, it'll last. People come up to me and say, you visited my school when I was in the 4th grade, I remember. Because you had those bodyguards with you. Anyway, that's what the little kids remember. But that can be a very big thing. I remember Ronald Reagan, considering the auspices here, which we are present, the White House called up and said, Ronald, the president wants to visit a school. So we went over here and visited Suitland High School. And the president got up and talked for a while, and then a bell rang, and the president, very mindful of his truancy when he was a boy, said, I guess I better stop because they're going to change classes. I could go on. And I said to the principal, the president could go on. And the president said, well, I don't want to interfere with math or civics or something. I said, Mr. President, this is a pretty good civics class right here.
Very good civics class.
So he went on for another
awesome.
for another out. It really was awesome. Let's shift gears because you talked about headlines, the Olympics, education. Some things that do make the headlines are in another part of your work, and that's in higher ed. We hear about Title IX. We hear about student loan business. We hear about things that are very deep, very significant, very important, very expensive. Higher ed, I found, I didn't know it when I started, that in some ways I had more leverage on some of the higher education issues than in the elementary and secondary.
Well, and the whole question of what is higher ed, I think is a really relevant one today. And
what's it for? Yeah.
Yeah, what is it for? And, I've said before that I think for too long we have given sent the subtle or not so subtle message that the only way to succeed as an adult is to go to a four-year college or university. And yet today we have over 6 million jobs that require some level of education beyond high school that are going unfilled. We don't have a good way currently to help direct students, to expose them to these opportunities. And as Congress considers reauthorizing the Higher Education Act, one which was, of course, passed in 1965, just a few things have changed since then, I think it would behoove them to take a couple steps back and say, what is the role of the federal government in supporting education beyond high school? And we need to take down the silos that have artificially grown up between career and technical education and traditional four-year, because they're really getting blurred in the marketplace today, and yet we insist on keeping them pretty siloed in this town. I've visited a number of really innovative high schools that are exposing students as early as junior high to a multitude of pathways. Just last week, I was in the Dallas area at Birdville. It's a career and technical high school that has, I think it was about 25 different pathways that students could pursue. Now, many of these students will ultimately go on to a four-year college or university, but many of them will come out of this high school with certifications ready to go into a good, high-paying job immediately. Well, those kinds of things need to be more prolific and proliferated and available to more and more students. McMinnville High School in Oregon I visited as well, another really intentional program that is introducing kids to a wide variety of opportunities to pursue both dual credit, dual enrollment, so they come out with, some of them with associate's degrees, or come out prepared to go into the next step. But I think we need to be looking at learning as really a lifelong pursuit.
Yeah, so a philosopher, education said it's not enough for a man to be good, he's got to be good for something. And I wonder if we have been guilty, maybe myself, with a PhD in philosophy, of thinking of education as the liberal arts, the humanities and social sciences, and looking down our nose at people who know how to do things, who work with their hands. And you can't export that. You can't send that overseas. And that's where a lot of these jobs are, correct? And we can do both, right? I mean, we can have literacy, we can have numeracy, and we can teach people different things. But I think there has been a built-in bias against the practical, if you will.
Mm-hmm. No, that has been the case. But I think that we have to acknowledge there are fewer and fewer traditional higher ed students today, and that over the course of the lifetime of someone who's in kindergarten today, they can look forward to a dozen or more different careers in their lifetime. Right.
When you talk to, in your life, you have done so many things. One of the things you've interacted with the corporate community, and now you're interacting with the corporate community in a different way. When you meet with CEOs, I'm thinking of what Ann said about the intersection of labor and education. What is it that people in the corporate world tell you they want from American schools that they're not getting?
Well, I think there are some core competencies that it would behoove all students to learn, and it would behoove all education institutions to focus on. And I'm not sure that that's been part of the narrative until lately. And being able to communicate well, being able to collaborate and work well with others, to think critically, and to be to foster creativity. And I think back to my own experience in school, and also observe students today who, kids are creative when they're little toddlers and very young. And I fear that all too often we try to sort of fit them in boxes and make them conform to something that they're not. And by the time that they're in, late elementary school or middle school, a lot of that creativity has been really, really, tamped down in a big way.
Right. I've talked to employers who've told me, somebody heard me give remarks, he said, you make it sound as if you want the schools to teach what it is we do at this company. He said, I don't want you to do that. He said, just give me a workforce of people with a good attitude, show up on time,
yes.
Basically literate, communicate, can get along with other people. And lately I've been hearing, don't have an attitude problem about work. I mean, we all like TGIF. Is it Friday? No, tomorrow. Anyway, so soon enough. But and we'll teach them. We'll teach them the rest. We'll teach them how to make the widgets here. But those sort of basic, you talked about basic competencies, but certain attributes of character and person as well to be be able to pass a drug test, for Pete's sakes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
John Boehner. Yeah, excuse me. Go ahead. Sorry.
And I really encourage those in the business community to engage educators and education because, again, I think the silos have been artificially constructed there.
Right.
And I think it's imperative that the business community have a voice into what's happening in K-12 education and certainly in higher ed. And again, I can refer to a school that I visited in Tennessee, in Murfreesboro, where the Chamber of Commerce and some of the large employers in the area came together with this high school and again created a program, or a bunch of programs and pathways for students to get a taste of what could be with some of the large employers in the area and what those futures might look like, and would get them prepared for engineering and other four-year pursuits. But it was really a very cohesive effort, and I was very admiring of the way the business community was brought in and welcomed to be a part of that conversation. And it has to be a two-way street because I think there's been a resistance to really engage business in some of these efforts.
Yeah, and what I've found is there's a certain reluctance. Some of these hard-driving business types, when they're hard-driving their own business, will not tell you what they're really thinking when it comes to education. Say, well, we want to hear from you in the same candid way that you would run your company. And that would be, I think, a very good exchange.
Right.
What's interesting in listening to you, I see we're running out of time, but I was going to encourage you at the end to visit more schools, but you've already cited about 7, which is great. I mean, to make each point, you talked about a visit. So Shakespeare says to give to every abstraction a local habitation and a name. And you've given a lot of local habitations and names. And thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, Secretary.
I think we both hope when we meet in 20 years, 25 years with the Secretary of Education then, that we'll say, it's not flat anymore. It really, after DeVos, it just really went up and just kept going.
I'm very hopeful that for our nation's future that we have to go in that direction.
Not at risk anymore. How about that? How about a book in 20 years, not at risk anymore?
That would be a wonderful thing.
And we'll blurb it. You and I will blurb it, okay?
There we go.
Thank you, Secretary DeVos.
Thank you
very much.